The New Mexico sun sank low, painting the desert in shades of fire. The farm stood alone, a weathered house and a crumbling barn hunched against the endless plain. The man, a loner with a face carved by grief, stepped off his horse, dust clinging to his boots. He'd bought the place for cheap, told it was abandoned, left to rot under the weight of years. The deed, creased and worn, sat heavy in his pocket, a fragile promise of a new start. His hands, scarred from a life of drifting, gripped the reins as he scanned the horizon, his eyes shadowed by a past he meant to bury. Night fell sharp, the stars cold and unyielding. He lit a lantern inside the house, its glow flickering over bare walls and a single chair. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old wood, the silence broken only by the creak of his boots. He set his hat on the table, his rifle against the wall, and lay on a thin cot. Sleep stayed out of reach. A faint light caught his eye through the cracked window, a soft glow leaking from the barn, unsteady as a heartbeat. He rose, hand on his rifle, his pulse steady but alert. He crossed the yard, the night biting his skin. The barn door groaned under his touch, the lantern casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. 3 women stood in the corner, their figures sharp against a single candle's flame. Apache women, their dark hair loose, their eyes fixed on him. The oldest, her face lined with survival, stood tall, her hands steady. The youngest, barely a woman, clutched a worn blanket, her gaze wide but defiant. The third, lean and sharp, held a knife low, its blade catching the light. They said nothing, their silence heavy, as if they'd known he'd come. He gripped his rifle tighter, his instinct to drive them out. This was his land, his chance to start clean. But something stopped him. The oldest sighs, heavy with a weight like his own. The youngest's trembling hands, clutching her blanket. The third's quiet readiness, her knife not raised but close. He lowered the lantern, its light pooling at his feet. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring, the candle flickering between them. Morning broke gray and cold. The women hadn't left. He found them outside the barn, tending a small fire, their movements swift and sure. The oldest stirred a pot of thin gruel, her scarred hands steady. The youngest fed sticks to the flames, her eyes flicking to him. The third sharpened her knife on a stone, her gaze sharp but not hostile. He stood on the porch, hand near the rifle inside, watching. His jaw tightened, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he drew water from the well and set the bucket near their fire. The youngest looked up, her nod faint, and poured water into a jug. Days passed in uneasy quiet. He worked alone, clearing stones from the field, nailing boards to sagging fences. The women stayed near the barn, their presence a shadow he couldn't shake. They didn't ask for shelter, didn't plead. They chopped wood, their axes striking in rhythm. They mended blankets, their needles flashing in the sun. He watched, his hands busy, but his mind restless. He saw their scars, one on the oldest's wrist, another on the youngest cheek, a faint line on the third's arm. Marks of a past that clung like dust. One evening, the youngest approached, her steps slow. She carried a bowl of gruel, steam curling in the cooling air. She set it on the porch rail, her eyes avoiding his, and turned back to the barn. He stared at the bowl, his hunger sharp but his pride sharper. He carried it inside, set it on the table, and sat in the dark, the lantern unlit. The next day, he found a broken shovel by the barn. He carved a new handle from cedar, his knife steady, and left it by their fire. The third picked it up, testing its weight, her eyes meeting his across the yard. She nodded, slow and deliberate, and returned to her work. He turned away, his chest tight with something unspoken. The farm began to stir. The field showed patches of green where the women planted seeds. The barn stood stronger, its door patched. The youngest trailed him now, carrying stones he'd cleared, her steps light. She handed him a nail for the fence, her fingers brushing his. He took it, his nod brief, but enough. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It carried the weight of their shared labor, a fragile bridge between strangers. The desert sun burned high, turning the New Mexico plain to shimmering gold. The farm stood stubborn, its fences straighter now, the field dotted with green where seeds had taken root. The man worked in the heat, his shirt damp as he hammered stakes into the earth. His hands, tied with the woven cord, moved with purpose, but his eyes flicked to the barn where the 3 Apache women kept their fire. Their presence was a shadow he no longer fought, though trust came slow, built on silence and small acts. The oldest woman knelt by the fire, grinding corn, her scarred hands steady as stone. The youngest wove a basket, her fingers quick but careful, her hum low under the wind's howl. The third sharpened her knife, the whetstones scrape a quiet warning. They moved as one, their eyes meeting as across the yard, not hostile but watchful. He hauled water from the well, setting the bucket closer to their fire than before. The youngest poured it into a jug, her nod brief but clear. He turned back to the field, his chest tight with something new. Days wove into weeks, their routines blending. He patched the barn's roof, his hammer echoing the women's axes as they chopped wood. The youngest trailed him, carrying stones he'd cleared, her step sure now. She dropped one, and he knelt to pick it up, his hand brushing hers. She froze, then met his eyes, her fear softening. He nodded, handing her the stone, and they worked together until dusk painted the sky red. The land whispered its secrets. He found a rusted blade in the barn's dirt floor, its handle carved with strange symbols. He showed it to the oldest, her fingers tracing the marks, her eyes distant. She tucked it in her belt, her gaze lingering on him, a question unasked. Later, he saw scratches on the barn's beams, circles and lines, not random but deliberate. He didn't speak of it, but the weight settled in his bones, tying him to the farm's hidden past. His own ghost stirred, a memory of fire, a name lost, a promise broken. His hands tightened on the axe, his eyes scanned the horizon at night. The women carried their own. The oldest stare at the stars, the third's grip on her knife at distant sounds, the youngest's hum turning mournful. He listened, his work pausing, feeling the ache of something shared. One evening, the third approached, her knife sheathed but her posture tense. She set a woven mat on the porch, its pattern intricate, its edges frayed. He looked at it, then at her, her eyes sharp but softer. He nodded, hanging the mat on the wall inside, its presence a quiet bridge. The next day, he left a sharpened axe handle by their fire, its wood smooth from his hands. The oldest tested its weight, her nod slow, a pact sealed in silence. The farm began to live. The field sprouted thin rows of corn, stubborn against the heat. The barn stood stronger, its walls patched. The youngest laughed, chasing the stray dog that lingered near the house, its tail wagging. The man watched, his hat tipped back, a warmth in his chest. The oldest joined her, guiding her hands to tie corn stalks. The third stood apart, her eyes on the road, her knife close. A shadow loomed. Hoofbeats sounded one morning, faint but steady. The man stood on the porch, rifle in hand, his jaw set. The women froze, their fire low, their knives drawn. The third scanned the horizon, her stance ready. The oldest pulled the youngest close, her hand firm. He met the oldest's gaze, nodding once. She returned it, her eyes hard but trusting. The hoofbeats faded, but the air stayed heavy, thick with threat. That night, he found a carved circle on the barn door, crossed with lines, like a vow. He traced it, the wood rough under his fingers. The youngest watched from the fire, her eyes bright. He left a smooth cedar stick by their fire, and the third began carving, her knife steady. Their silences spoke louder now, binding them to the land and each other. The wind shifted as autumn deepened, carrying a chill from the north over the New Mexico plain. The farm held firm, its field yielding thin corn stalks that bent but didn't break. The man harvested in the fading light, his knife cutting clean, the woven cord around his wrist a constant reminder. The 3 Apache women worked beside him now, their presence no longer a shadow, but a part of the land's rhythm. Trust had grown, slow and silent, forged in shared labor and unspoken understanding. The oldest woman bundled the stalks, her scarred hands quick and sure. The youngest carried them to the barn, her hum clearer now, a melody of survival. The third scouted the edges, her knife at her side, her eyes on the horizon. They moved together, their silences full of meaning. He handed the oldest a bundle, their fingers brushing, her nod deep with gratitude. He felt the weight of it, the bond tying them to the farm and each other. The secrets surfaced more. He found a hidden cache in the barn, dried herbs, a beaded pouch, items left by those who hid here before. The oldest examined them, her face softening, and tucked the pouch into her dress. He didn't ask, but he saw the locket she wore, its chain mended, a piece of her past reclaimed. His own memories pressed, a home in flames, a name whispered in the night. He stood at the porch, tracing the carved circle on the barn door, feeling the land's hold on them all. Gestures deepened the trust. The third handed him a carved amulet, its shape simple but strong, matching the patterns on the beams. He tied it to his belt, beside a knife she'd sharpened, his nod slow. The oldest shared stew by the house fire, their meals communal now, the flames casting warm shadows. The youngest wove a new cord, leaving it on the table for him. He wrapped it around his other wrist, her smile brief but real. The shadow drew closer. Hoofbeats returned one dawn, louder, persistent. The man rose, rifle in hand, his breath steady. The women gathered, their fire banked, knives drawn. The third positioned herself at the fence, her stance low. The oldest shielded the youngest, her hand firm. He met their eyes, nodding once, and stepped to the gate. The hoofbeats halted, dust settling, but no riders appeared. The threat lingered, the air thick with it. That evening, the oldest sat by the fire, her hands idle for the first time. She traced the scar on her wrist, her eyes distant. He sat across from her, the amulet heavy on his belt. The youngest hummed softly, the third sharpening blades nearby. He didn't speak, but he handed the oldest a cup of water, his gesture simple. She took it, her nod heavy with meaning, as if sharing a piece of her story without words. The farm flourished in small ways. The corn was stored, the barn stocked, the fences reinforced. The youngest laughed more, chasing the dog through the field. The man watched, his face less hard, a quiet warmth in his eyes. The third joined him at the well, their hands working the rope together. The oldest watched from the porch, her posture relaxed, trust solidifying like the earth underfoot. But the past wouldn't stay buried. He found a faded poster in town, words of wanted women, escape from traders who claimed them as property. He crumpled it, his fist tight, but brought supplies back, leaving them by. The winter wind cut sharp across the New Mexico plain, dusting the farm with frost. The house stood warm against the cold, its fire burning steady, the field resting under a thin blanket of white. The man chopped wood outside, his axe swinging clean, the woven cords on his wrists grounding him. The three Apache women shared the work, their presence a quiet strength that filled the farm. Trust had solidified, silent but deep, built on gestures and the land shared secrets. The oldest woman stoked the fire inside, her scarred hands steady as she added logs. The youngest ground herbs from the cache, her hum a soft melody in the room. The third mended a blanket, her knife nearby, her eyes flicking to the window. They moved with ease now, their silences comfortable. He entered with an armful of wood, setting it by the hearth. The youngest smiled, handing him a cup of tea, her fingers lingering. He took it, nodding, the warmth spreading through him. The farm's secrets unfolded further. He found an old journal in the attic, pages yellowed, words in a language he didn't know. He showed it to the oldest, her eyes widening as she turned the pages. She pointed to a drawing, a circle like the one on the barn door, and met his gaze, a story told without words. He left it with her, the locket around her neck glinting. His past echoed, less painfully now, a name, a fire, a debt that felt lighter in their company. Gestures wove them closer. The third carved a small figure from wood, a horse, and left it on the table. He turned it in his hands, its lines simple but true, and placed it on the mantel. The oldest shared a tale through signs, her hands painting the air with escape from chains, from men who traded lives. He listened, his jaw tight, understanding their flight, the farm's role as sanctuary. The youngest wove cords for all, tying them around their wrists, a bond made visible. The threat grew real. Riders appeared on the horizon one afternoon. 3 men, dust rising behind them. The man stood on the porch, rifle ready, his heart steady. The women gathered, knives drawn, the fire banked. The third positioned at the window, her stance low. The oldest shielded the youngest, her hand firm. He met their eyes, his nod resolute, and stepped forward. The riders halted at the gate, their voices rough, demanding the women, accusing theft from traders. The leader dismounted, hand on his gun, eyes narrowing. The air tensed, heavy with violence. The man raised his rifle, shaking his head, his voice low but firm for the first time. The riders shifted, guns drawn. The third moved like shadow, her knife flashing from the side. A shot rang out, the man firing, dropping one rider. The oldest threw a stone, staggering another. The youngest stayed back, her eyes wide but brave. The struggle was swift, dust churning. The man tackled the leader, fists landing heavy, the cords on his wrist tight. The third disarmed the second rider, her blade at his throat. The oldest bound the third, with rope, her movements sure. The riders lay subdued, their horses stamping. The man stood, breath ragged, meeting the oldest's gaze. She nodded, her hand on his arm, brief but warm. The youngest ran to him, her hug fierce. The third sheathed her knife, her eyes soft with relief. They tied the riders in the barn, the men silent under their stares. The man sent the youngest to fetch supplies, his choice made, not safety, but them. The farm held, its secrets their shield. The New Mexico snow fell soft, blanketing the farm in quiet white. The house glowed with firelight, its walls holding the warmth of shared lives. The man stood on the porch, his rifle leaning against the rail, his eyes on the horizon where the riders' tracks had faded. The choice had been made, not in words, but in action, a stand that bound them tighter than any deed. The 3 Apache women moved inside, their presence a quiet victory over the shadows of the past. The oldest woman sat by the hearth, her scarred hands idle, the locket at her neck catching the flames. The youngest wove a final chord, her hum a song of home now, her eyes bright with safety. The third cleaned her knife, its blade dull from use, her posture relaxed for the first time. They shared the space with him, their silences full of peace. He entered, snow melting from his boots, and set fresh wood by the fire. The youngest rose, hugging him briefly, her trust complete. He nodded, the warmth in his chest deeper than the cold outside. The farm's secrets were theirs now. He added to the carved circle on the barn door, etching lines that bound 4 figures together. The oldest touched it, her fingers lingering, a nod sealing their family. The land had hidden them, protected them, its whispers now a comfort. His past, a fire, a name, a debt, faded in their light, reborn in the quiet acts of care. Gestures completed the bond. The third placed the carved horse beside the amulet on the mantle, a silent thanks. The oldest shared the journal's pages, her hands pointing to symbols of freedom. He understood their escape, the trader's chains broken by the farm's embrace. The youngest tied the last cord around the dog's neck, laughing as it bounded through the snow. He watched, his smile reel, the weight lifted. No more riders came. The threats scattered like dust. The farm endured, its field waiting for spring, its barn strong. They worked as one, harvesting wood, mending tools, their routines a rhythm of life. The man carved names into a beam, theirs etched deep. The oldest smiled, rare and true. The third sheathed her knife for good, her eyes soft. The youngest hummed louder, her voice filling the house. The past lingered on the horizon, but it no longer ruled. They had chosen each other, forging a family not by blood, but by the land's quiet grace. The desert stretched vast, but they stood together, a rebirth in the snow's silence. The farm held them, Its secret's their strength, a quiet triumph over loss.